Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm very pleased to be in the office of Mr. Gerard Piel, the president and publisher of Scientific American. And Mr. Piel, welcome very, very much to Conversations indeed.
Glad to be with you.
I wonder if you might share for us. You've been, if I understand it now, if I'm correct, publisher of Scientific Atlantic of America, which has become an American and a world institution. But since 1947, am I right in that?
We took over the old
Yeah.
magazine in 1947.
Uh-huh.
The we being two partners and myself and a company of brave venture capitalists who put up the money. We were setting out to start a new magazine of science. We used some of our precious promotion capital to buy the old magazine. The old magazine was very much on its last legs. It had lost its editorial direction, it had lost circulation. The roll-top desk, when I opened it up in the office of the publisher the first day I took office, had a missive in it from N.W. Air canceling the last insertions of the last first-class advertiser in the magazine. That was Bell Laboratories.
Oh, I see. Right, I see, yeah.
And when it was announced, however, that we were going to make a new magazine out of the old Scientific American, there were enough people at Bell Labs who knew what we were up to and understood what we were wanting to do, so that we got another letter from NWA reinstating Bell Labs.
Oh, I see.
To start with our first issue.
Well, that was a nice way to begin.
It was.
Yeah, it was. But then it was building upon a magazine that had been established some time ago.
It was founded in August. The first issue was published in August 28, 1845. By a remarkable fellow named Rufus Porter, who was a Yankee tinker and peddler, and was an aficionado of the natural sciences. He's famous in the American art world as an American primitive painter. He painted frescoes, genuine frescoes with mineral pigments on wet plaster in houses all over northern Massachusetts and the southern tier counties of Vermont and New Hampshire. He started Scientific American with the wonderful rousing conviction that the increase in human understanding of nature and the application of that knowledge would make a better society. And I think in many ways the history of our country justifies that confidence, although we still see our fellow men abusing the power that science has put in our hands, as well as making good use of it.
Which becomes more and more awesome and Promethean as we move each day into the future.
Well, in many ways, that's why my colleagues and I thought there was need for a magazine of science. I did my apprenticeship on Life magazine, and I was made a science editor because I had an A.B. from Harvard College, which certified me as an illiterate in science. It was thought by John Shaw Billings, my managing editor there, that if the readers of Life magazine were to understand science, it had to be explained to them by someone who knew as little as they did.
Hey, there might be something to that.
I think there may be something to
A person of high general intelligence who can explain some of these scientific precepts in a way that can be grasped by a wider audience.
I thank you for the suggestion that I have high general intelligence, but I found it was very interesting work, and I discovered how much I had neglected my education.
And you became enthralled with science and scientific discovery.
I did indeed, and with especially its significance for human existence and its relationship to modern history. Now, ignoramus that I was, as an active and ambitious young journalist, I didn't let anything escape my attention, and I came into full possession of everything that was to be known about the atomic bomb project, but before the end of 1944.
Wow.
So much for the notion that there can be kept, that secrets can be kept, but there's such a thing as real military secrets that last longer than, let's say, the duration of a military action.
Yes, sir.
I'll agree that there's a need for military secrecy when you've got troop ships leaving New York Harbor, but you can't muzzle science and you can't hide the secrets of nature from your enemy, or putative enemy. And so with the knowledge that national states were about to come into possession of such such a dreadful and enormous power, it became clear to me we needed a good magazine of science. And that's what we set out to make of Scientific American. We published our first issue in May 1948. It took us until January 1950, with our precious venture capital turned over in circulation promotion, to build our circulation of 100,000 subscribers. It took us another year to get our break-even advertising. By that time, we had to raise $1 million. We were able to pay our investors off within the next 5 years. And the circulation has been growing ever since. And the most thrilling part of the whole development is now its circulation in translated editions overseas. I should explain that the essence of the invention of Scientific American is that we invite the scientist who has done the work to tell his story. That way, the articles are written by people who know what they're talking about.
And addressed
they're addressed to the interested layman.
To the interested layman, and not necessarily to their colleagues, although many of the
the
people within the sciences can keep up with developments in other fields of science very, very well at a high general academic standard.
You've got it. The point is that a physicist is a layman in medicine or in biology or in geology, and correspondingly the geologist wants to know what the physicist is doing. And the work of every field of science is significant to every other field.
And it is
nature is a seamless web.
Yes, right. And in each, if I may, each one of those developments are extremely exciting stories in and of themselves.
Of course. And but they're most exciting because of their relevance and importance to wide spectrum of human interest. This is why the magazine concentrates on the fundamental sciences and on basic research rather than on technology. But we have not missed any of the significant developments in technology that have taken place in our time. We've covered them all. When the transistor was a gleam in the Bell Lab's eyes, we published on it, and out of the transistor in our lifetime came the entire computer industry and the solid-state electronics revolution in communications and in everything else.
And just as you were in a position to be apprised, having been in communication with the scientific community, the physics community, and so forth, in terms of the early development of an atomic weapon capability and so forth, you would be advised of modern developments by virtue of the fact that
except that people weren't telling me about the atomic weapon when it was under secrecy. It was simply that enough was already in the public domain, and all I had to do was stumble upon sufficient evidence that showed me that something was being done about it.
Right.
That what was in the published literature already became clear to me. Now, the scientist generously allows us to help him with his task of telling his story to his non-captive audience.
It is a non-captive?
Sure. I mean, the scientist usually is talking to his students or to his colleagues in his field who have got to know what he's doing. But our readers don't have to know. They just want to know. But the scientist has got to hold their attention and make clear what he's about.
Yeah, and that's a challenge.
Well, that's a challenge, and that's a challenge we help him face with what we can do with his text and with the illustration of the magazine.
Do you ever get charged by the more academic literatures as being popularizers of the scientific discovery?
No, on the contrary. They mostly accuse us of being too difficult to read.
Is that a fact? Right?
Yes. But the thrill here in the last 10 years has been to see the magazine burgeon in translated edition. And every one of our editions is published in the country it's published in and the language it's published in at the invitation of a national of that country. Thus, an Italian publisher came to us and asked how we could go about publishing our magazine in his country. We did it as a joint venture. We've done them all as joint ventures except for our 2 socialist country editions. We're published in Italy, in Japan, in Spain, in France, and Germany. These are all market economies where we have joint ventures with local publishers, except that in Germany we now have a wholly owned subsidiary publishing our magazine there. It's going to be our flagship abroad because it's got 110,000 circulation already. Now we're published in China, out of Chongqing, by the People's Republic of China.
That's just been announced, hasn't it?
No, that's been going for 2 years. What has just been announced is that we're about to be published in the Russian language in the Soviet Union. They have published us since 1962, when one of the great Russian scientists was visiting our country and had dinner at my house. He said, "We must have your magazine in our country." And I said, "We should be glad to help you have our magazine in your country." Well, he didn't need our help. He went home and told them to get started, and they did, and we discovered a couple of years later that they had been doing it in English.
They had?
They do it rather crudely. They have been picking it up by putting it under a camera and making an offset press plate and putting it on what looks like blotting paper, and the pictures look terrible because they've got a moire screen on them. When you overlay a screen on a screen, you've got a moire pattern.
Yeah, right.
So, in this last year, I persuaded them to try to do better, and they're now going to use our film, and they're going to translate the magazine into Russian. And whereas the magazine in English has largely an institutional circulation in the Soviet Union, it will now go to personal subscribers.
That must be very satisfying to you.
It's very exciting. And incidentally, we've been publishing both Chinese and Soviet authors. We publish scientists, whoever they are and wherever they are in the world, who have got interesting stories to tell their fellow men. And the Russians and Chinese have such stories as often as anybody else does. And we've been publishing Russian authors regularly, and we expect to publish them even more regularly now that we'll have a regular contact with Russian colleagues.
It must be a terribly exciting process that you go through here, putting together, as it were, and sifting out materials coming in from much of the leading edge of the scientific community, in a way anxious to communicate with their fellow scientists and fellow citizenry. It's an extremely exciting process of being made aware of the developments, being made aware of the process of creating it, helping in the creative production and transmission of that information. It must be an extremely educational and exciting process that it is for you to put out this very lively new journal. Huh?
It's a perpetual education, absolutely. You know, it is the essence of science that a new work doesn't really exist until it's been published. The primary publication is, of course, by the scientist to the fellows in his own field. But scientists feel further that the world must understand what they're doing. The world has been radically changed in man's understanding and comprehension. And our picture of ourselves in the world has changed. In the 30 years in which we've published our magazine, for example, with respect to human evolution, it's only become understood in that period that the first tool makers were not Homo sapiens. The first tool makers appeared 3 million years ago on Earth, little 90-pound primates that still use their hands that they made the tools with for walking.
And they were the ancestors to what was become?
So the tool makers, the tool-making capacity was one of the advantages of the forerunners of man in our biological evolution.
Yeah, and it keeps going back further and further.
Well, it does, but the tool makers are now pretty well pinned down, the earliest ones around 3 million years ago. But now, when you look at the record of the stone tools, that are the most common fossils of that whole period, you don't find many of the bones of these creatures because they lived on the banks of rivers and on the shores of the sea, where geological activity is, erosion and so on.
And there were few of them, probably.
And there were few of them. The breeding population wasn't very large, maybe 100,000 or so. But out of that record, you can see that these creatures were forming purpose. They were forming value. They had language. They had social order.
Yeah, new consciousness, a new collective consciousness was beginning to evolve.
So, and what you have to say out of this record is that man made himself. That the formation of this purpose and value in pre-human forerunners made the human species.
In a very unique way, it was mankind was able to extend his consciousness through the use of technologies and make the environment other than that which was, in a sense, given.
Right, but this Copernican revolution, with respect to human evolution, has happened in the 30 years we've published.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was thought before that tool making was the status symbol of belonging to the human species. Now it turns out that the human species got made by tool makers.
Yeah, it would depend a little bit on how our definition of the human species and our definition of the beginning of that.
Well, Homo sapiens is well defined as a biological entity. But Homo sapiens was a product of evolution with a new kind of quality in it. It was in a sense, Lamarckian evolution, in that experience could be selected and passed on to future generations. So this great story is one of those we've covered. Another is the resolution of the biochemical mechanism of the living cell, the DNA story, and all that follows from that.
Basic knowledge is coming available to us. It simply has not been available throughout all of the whole of the human experience.
Well,
exponentially and synergistically new stores of knowledge and understanding of the process in which we are part are becoming available to us. An incredibly exciting moment in development in terms of the intellectual involving of events in this part of the universe.
That's right. Another great story that we've covered in our time is the expansion of the vision of man into that great universe beyond. The astronomy until 50 years or so ago was limited to very largely to the visible wavelengths, and the visible wavelengths of light scarcely make an octave in the visible wavelength. Of course, though, the electromagnetic spectrum reaches all the way from the long radio waves, and even longer waves than that, to very, very short wavelengths where you finally approach the wavelength where the wavelengths are the diameter of an electron. So this is many orders of magnitude, not to say octaves. Now, with radio astronomy at one end, on the long wavelength end, with ultraviolet and X-ray astronomy on the shortwave end, and even gamma ray astronomy, the telescopes of the world, and especially the marvelous prospect soon of a telescope orbiting the Earth in space, now gives astronomy something like 52 octaves in the 30-year period that we've been publishing. And so now the changeless universe in which it was once thought the only moving and changing bodies were those in the solar system. You know, those are the ones that the ancients saw tracking across the sky and moving against a background of fixed stars. Now we look at those fixed stars, and those are very active objects, because what these other wavelengths bring us is stories of the collapse of entire galaxies that can be observed in a matter of hours. These are events that involve millions of solar masses and unimaginable forces and release of energy. And these are now, we're eyewitness to events of this kind. And of course, the further out in space we look, because light travels at a finite speed, it stands to reason that the further out we look, the further back we're looking in time. That if we're looking at a galaxy that is 10 billion light years distant, that light started to us 10 billion years ago. When you get out far enough, and it's been poetically put by one astronomer, we are beginning to see the glow of the day of creation itself. So this is a glorious enterprise to be involved in.
It's a glorious enterprise to be involved in terms of trying to understand the processes by which we increasingly are able to understand the outer and the inner reaches of the process of which we are a part of consciousness itself. And you were speaking before about the early on development of what was to become mankind, 3 million years or so. I wonder, do you ever feel that from your knowledge base and understanding, or has it made you feel or sense that universe or universal mind or the universe is cohered by intelligence? Or I wonder, just in a general, broad kind of epistemological reading of the structure of the universe, that all of this knowledge is given you in terms of, do you understand the structure of the universe?
Well,
is there an intelligence that coheres that? Is understandable?
I think intelligence in that sense,
or is it more sort of
well, intelligence in that sense is, I think, a kind of anthropomorphic, if you'll forgive the expression.
Perhaps, yeah.
Means there's an impulse we have to have final answers. But the most important thing I hope people can learn from reading Scientific American is that science doesn't pretend to have final answers. That there are no final answers. That what it takes to live a rational life in our time is the courage to live with tentative answers, and the courage to take your own position on issues.
Yeah.
And Scientific American has not shrunk from covering the issues that surround the advance and the application of science in our time. You will not find in print anywhere a better record of the arms race than in the issues we have been publishing since 1948. And you'll find no better record of the shameful story of the phony arms control negotiations that our country has participated in with the Soviet Union. You will find nowhere else in the American press as solid a coverage of the next greatest problem that's facing mankind, which is the economic development of the developing countries, the underdeveloped countries, on which hangs the question of whether or not this splendid human species is going to make this planet a home that's fit to live in.
Now, many of these issues begin to roam into or move into areas of what? Geopolitical concern, economic concern, and
Well,
things that are thought sometimes
geopolitics
beyond the realm of the scientific mandate. Do you ever get that? People saying that? Do you understand this?
The scientific mandate, in our estimation of it, takes us into these questions, because these are questions to which science has answers, and some of them are questions which have been raised by science. The one question that's raised by science, for example, is that it is possible for our species to make this planet its home, for mankind to bring its numbers into stable and rational relationship with the capacity of nature to sustain us, that the world population is not fated in the Malthusian prediction to go on growing until we have consumed the like a bacterial culture, with the bacteria consuming the food supply and the culture. The fact is that about a third of the world population is already stabilized. I mean, we have about 1/3 of the world's people are living in rich nations, or nations in which human well-being has been sufficiently popularized to bring the birth rate down, to converge with the death rate, and so to bring those populations into
stable
zero
relations.
growth.
Yeah, right.
Okay. We've got 2/3 of the species to go. On the record of what happened to that first third, it's a question of the speed of their economic development. That's an issue I can't find any feedback on in American politics. It's the last issue on the agenda of our national politics, which to me suggests somewhat my failure as a popularizer of science, because by this time people ought to understand that message better.
Do you feel, I wonder, if from a scientific or a knowledge-based perspective, or let's say from applied scientific knowledge-based capability in technological productive systems, or technologically augmented knowledge-based capability to provide for the world's citizenry, do we have a certain abstract capability and a physical capability? Do we have a capability and a knowledge base that is an advance of the ability of the political, economic, organizing assumptions to realize, and that it does then create a really difficult situation that the potentialities that we have in a knowledge-based sense are not being able to be realized, even though we know we could do these things. We seem not to be able to do it because of our political, economic organizing assumptions.
And you put it very well. I think that the greatest threat to the existence of mankind is the persistence of national states. And the behavior of our own national state is a pretty good example of what I mean. We, in possession of all of the wealth and power of our continent, and in possession of the whole heritage of mankind, in our command of the sciences and the technology, are not meeting our obligations to our fellow men. On the one hand, in the control of and the ending of the arms race, and on the other hand, the salvation of the human race in the great task of economic development. So, yes, man's capacity has outrun his institutions.
And that is a very, very serious problem that has to be addressed by all people of responsible concern for helping to see that the evolutionary process can achieve some sort of a maximal pattern in this part of the universe at a particular time.
Well,
it's a particularly crucial moment.
I would put the objective as a simpler one, and that is to see the world by the middle of the next century arriving at a population of around 10 or 12 billion, living in peace and with everyone who is born blessed with the expectation of being able to see his or her grandchildren, to live out a full human biography, and at that point, with mankind getting on to the cultivation of its best and highest capacities. At this point, 2/3 of our fellow men are still condemned by poverty and economic backwardness.
Perhaps needlessly.
Well,
in a certain comprehensive
well,
sense.
of course.
There are alternatives. There are alternatives if they could become part of the public dialogue.
Well, that's the point. That they are in this plight because their numbers have outrun the technology on which their past civilization and existence has been based.
The knowledge base, the technological capability are increasing almost in synergistic, almost exponential patterns now in this particular time in the evolution. If we stretch that 3 million year period out again,
well, we don't need an exponential increase in knowledge beyond where we sit today.
Oh, right. But I mean, it's coming at such a rapid pace right now, in this particular moment.
Well,
or these years.
But
over a
but
longer
this is of greatest interest, I think, because what it has to tell us about our identity. Ourselves and of our place and of the nature of the world we live in. When it comes to technology, the present state of the art is more than adequate to provide for the kind of human existence I'm speaking of for a human population stabilized at around 10 or 12 billion people. Now that is an objective for the next century. It seems to me is first of all feasible, and secondly it is an objective that can be set now for the first time in history.
First time it might be that that's the first time these objectives could be set in a historical pattern,
in any
the
pattern.
loop of which it would go out 4 million years. We may be closing quote on 4 million years of human history and opening into a new capability that is going to provide the possibility of...
One of the things nature tells us is that evolution and history have been accelerating. People speak of the dinosaurs as failures. The dinosaurs were around for about 300 million years. Mammals have only been around for about 100 million. Man has only been around for about 3 million. We've got a long way to go to exhibit ourselves as smart as the dinosaurs.
A long way to go to exhibit ourselves as smart as the dinosaurs.
Yeah. To demonstrate.
That was in terms of the time that we were
in terms of our survival.
In terms of our survival, right? Well, in terms of our survival, and perhaps that we live at a time, I wonder, do you feel, that it might be that we live Promethean-like, with the capability to bring such destructive capability that never has been characteristic of mankind throughout human history. They could destroy the tribe in the other valley or something of that sort. But now we're getting close to systems that really threaten the whole ecosystem in a Promethean capability. If the obverse side of the destructive potentialities of technology and science and so forth, the obverse side, if we find our way through to appropriate patterns and so forth, might very well be a pattern of activity on planet Earth that could be almost, in a certain sense, liberating in its notions and liberating in keeping with some ancient prophecies and ancient projections.
Well, I don't know where the ancient prophecies and projections come in. I do understand that this is the first time in human existence that we've seen nations in which people live out full human biographies.
Yeah.
The statement by Hobbes 200 years ago that life is nasty, brutish, and short was true. The life expectancy of all of our forerunners was not more than 25 years.
James Joyce called history a nightmare.
It was, and maybe out of that nightmare can come people can come forward into broad daylight and live lives as human beings.
Live life as full human beings in a way that perhaps it's been difficult for us to do in a synergistic sense for all of world citizens throughout a good deal of that historical process. Are you optimistic concerning the human prospect as you look ahead?
I'm optimistic about what's possible. My optimism is heavily qualified with respect to the performance of our institutions. And as a citizen of the United States, I tremble at the responsibility each of us carries for the recklessness and the irrationality and irresponsibility of American behavior in the world. Our country came out of the Second World War, the hope of mankind.
Yeah.
Today, our country is the despair of mankind. A very fine senator from the Middle West went abroad into the world about 10 years ago when the foreign aid bill was before Congress to see what had happened with the foreign aid that had been put out up to that point, and he came back and said that if the Lord had been merciful, he'd have never let those people know us. This is what American power has been used for. And we as American citizens have got a powerful and heavy burden on our consciences and our citizenship to make our country behave more rationally and constructively.
More rationally and more constructively and more in keeping with an appropriate kind of leadership position that you feel is its capability, if we could but begin to move the institutional structuring in the society onto the right track that is perceivable as a direction that we could move.
Yeah.
Right. But that we have a great deal of difficulty somehow getting those perceptions into the public dialogue or into the actual historical structuring of the American institutional pattern itself. Well, that's before whether or not you thought we might live at a time of qualitative transformation.
It's quite clear
within which, in the systems where we could begin to understand these potentialities, it might be a little bit difficult to see the peaceful are cut up in what Dr. Fuller calls special case specialization. Nationalism is, in a certain sense, a historically inherited institution, and those who are responsible for developing alternatives to the way in which our historically inherited institutional structuring is would have the responsibility of presenting alternatives that could be so comprehensively appropriate as those responsible for those institutions in a new way of operation, transformative, but in a way that could also be involving those. Perhaps we haven't yet come up with the patterns comprehensively of an alternative to those patterns that historically we've been limping along with. I mean, collectively as a human society.
I have suggested what I think here is a modest, is a easily comprehensible, and is a reasonable and attainable pattern. And that's something that people can learn from better understanding of themselves and of the world in it they are in by understanding the work of modern science better. I don't think there's anything particularly mystical about it. We're only talking about making it possible for people to be people, which they haven't had the opportunity of being throughout most of human history.
They haven't been able to be, and it seems to
a life expectancy of 25 years doesn't carry you very far, does it?
No. That's all that's been throughout most of the human experience.
Until the year 1600, that was the life expectancy of the people of Europe. Until about the middle of the 19th century, it was the life expectancy of the rest of the people on Earth. The famous population explosion is only the consequence only of the fall in the death rate and the increase in life expectancy. And with the popularization of material well-being, people who have gone through that heady experience begin to control their fertility without any help from
planning boards.
Yeah.
They do. Right. They seem to be just following upon the developmental process as the population rate increase goes down.
No, I'm not going to criticize the Chinese government for the rather draconian measures they're taking to secure population control, but they are working with a highly motivated population, so it's possible for them to propose the extreme objective of the one-child family from now until the end of the century. If they succeed in doing that, they'll stabilize their population at around 1.2 billion.
Yeah, right, okay. And if we begin to look out, yeah, right, it's about 1 billion now. It's 1.2 billion now, isn't it?
No, it's about 1 billion now.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Well, they're taking a census, and perhaps we'll know in another few months or a year.
We're getting more and more. We're getting more and more information about that all the time.
Incidentally, this is the first census in China's history, and that itself is a milestone of progress.
Certainly is. Yeah.
Another milestone of progress is that if all goes well, they've had their last famine.
They had a disastrous one just a while back, didn't they? Even just in the modern experience, a tremendous one.
Not since the communist liberation, as they call it. They've had some tough times.
They had tough times, floods, they had tough times, natural disasters.
But they've had a responsible central government that has moved resources where needed into areas threatened with famine, and that didn't happen before. You know, we had famine in America in the 1880s.
Yeah, right.
So, and this common inexperience of mankind is out of the memory of Europeans by only a couple of hundred years.
Do you suppose it could ever be through elegance of design and through, we know increasingly the elegance of design of nature itself, and we have elegance of design and capability and synergy, ephemeralization that Dr. Fuller speaks of in terms of the appropriate utilization of design, plus a perception perhaps of some alteration in the geopolitical realities of the world structure that could help us all move beyond narrow nationalism within a militaristic kind of context, that we could ever get into a condition where the fundamental assumption of insufficiency or scarcity, which has been the underlying milieu or the context within which human institutions have been formulated, could itself be superseded, and we might open upon a period where sufficiency, if not abundance, could be the milieu within human institutions.
Well, if that were a nutshell, you'll put my story in it. Yes, the institutions of high civilization are founded upon scarcity. Their function was to provide for the inequitable distribution of not enough to go around by such means, by slavery and like institutions. Enough got scraped up to the top to make it possible for the upper classes to get on with the great task of civilization, of high civilization, of building cities, of art, of history, and all the agony and splendor that went with it. Now we're talking about the arrival of abundance, and a whole different kind of morality must come in. Under scarcity, one man could increase his well-being only at the expense of others.
Absolutely.
Well, under abundance, with the abundance of technology, you turn that morality upside down. Now a man can increase his well-being only by increasing the well-being of others.
That's right.
You see,
synergies come into play.
The well-off people in our country who sit around wringing their hands over the crime wave ought to recognize that comes out of inequity, that it comes out of poverty, out of cultural deprivation. And they can't enjoy their well-being until they've done something about equity.
I just wonder if it isn't on the part of a great number of people that it isn't all that clear exactly, even if they have that sense, what it is we can actually do, what the real root problem is, what the cause is. It's hard to identify what political leadership might espouse.
We have a whole baggage of twisted values to get cured of.
Yeah, we ought to be a little easy on each other too if we are at a time of such qualitative transformation from a reality structure or an epistemological reality that is one that has been one of scarcity. That's the reality within which human institutions evolve. If we are, in fact, at a moment of birth, of transformation, perhaps the adverse side of the destructive capability that the atomic and hydrogen and bacteriological weaponry might provoke, that's such a qualitatively incredible transformation comparable to a birth of a new capability that's never been available to the leadership of the world before to formulate our institutions as that. We ought to be a little patient with each other in terms of being able to grasp the possibility of that, because the change is such a very large scale one, if that is in fact.
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. We have our institutions to rebuild and our values to remake. That's quite clear. And we ought to get on with it.
You're going to be doing a special issue, if I'm not mistaken, this September 1982 issue on robotics?
Well, we're doing an issue on the mechanization of work. The robot is kind of the cherry on the Charlotte russe. I mean, it's visible. It's up there on top.
Yeah, right.
But the real impact of mechanization has come already through the feedback loop, through the computer through, well, first of all, through horsepower.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
The steam engine and its descendants, which took off the burden off of man's back.
Right.
That is to say, with horsepower, we do the work of human muscles.
Yeah.
Now, we have moved into an epoch in which the flea power of electrons trickling through solid-state crystals is taking over functions of the human nervous system. So we really have technological unemployment to contend with.
We do.
I think beyond doubt. I think that we have already demonstrated marvelous flexibility in our democracy in absorbing technological unemployment. Well, let's take a brief bird's eye view of the economic history of the country. In 1820, 70% of the population was engaged in agriculture. Today, 70% of the population is engaged in the services, and only 3% are still in agriculture.
Correct.
3% of the labor force. That's the transformation that has happened. Now, of the 70% that's in the services, half are on the public payroll or are supported by public expenditure. And the public payroll and the public sector, which has come under such denigration in this idiotic turn in American politics through which we're living, carries the most significant enterprises of our society. That is to say, education is basically a public sector enterprise. Health is basically a public sector enterprise. The amenities of our city, the protection of civil order. This is all public sector.
By and large.
Now the notion that we can dismantle this infrastructure, this base on which our civilization rests, is lunacy. It is the building of human capital through the public sector institutions. You know, and I would count Harvard as a public sector institution. Harvard is so dependent upon public expenditure today that I worry about its autonomy. And that's something Americans have got to work at, which is to protect the autonomy of scholarship and of science, and protect the dignity and the freedom of the individual. Because with the enormous power, the concentration of economic power in our time, and the enormous concentration of power in our government, I mean, I'm not celebrating the arrival of big government, but we've got to learn how politically to deal with it. And when only 52% of us go to the polls in a presidential election, then we're not very good at self-government.
Again, I wonder if it couldn't be that the qualities of political choices put before the people is what's lacking.
It's up to the people to
well, I guess maybe what I was saying is, in a certain sense,
you can't blame the Democratic and Republican Party. We each have got to blame ourselves. But
whether we have a public or private sector development of services or other kinds of capabilities, it's a question of, I suppose you said before, they might have technological unemployment. Do you think we're at a point?
Well, we've already soaked up.
Yeah, right.
See, well, we've already soaked up a lot of people who are disemployed from production into services.
Yeah, right.
And if you take the strict definition of what the market economy is that prevails in Washington today, then more than a third of the labor force is out of the economy. I mean, if they think of the economy as made up only of private enterprise and businesses, then okay, 1/3 of the country is already out of it.
Yeah.
In fact, if you now add to that 1/3 the people who are receiving transfer payments, meaning getting government checks, not for doing work, and this is the 20-odd million on Social Security. It's the 10 million who are receiving welfare. I mean, add them up and add their dependents, and more than half of the American people are living on incomes generated by political decision and not by market decision. So we've already crossed that continental divide.
In that sense we have, and yet at the same time we have a reality structure. I wonder if we have a reality structure where labor's input or human input to productivity, if we could measure labor's input to productivity and technology's input to productivity, particularly with things like robotics and other kinds of systems that are coming along. Isn't it true that overall, particularly a lot of those service areas of information technologies and so forth, and robotics and computer processing, that there's a tremendous potential for productivity that's not going to require, particularly as we begin to look ahead, large labor input to that. And yet at the same time, we have a situation where probably 95% of our population only have a legitimate claim on income for life's purposes by having a labor relationship to the productive process, not having any viable holding of ownership of the technology in order to distribute income. Do you think there could be a way we could distribute income by getting more and more people involved as owners as a way of distributing income and open up some capital formation capabilities we have not been able to see?
Mr. Kelso's instant capitalism
Well, he, among others, have been thinking about the possibility of beginning to have a wider ownership base of technology as a system of income distribution as opposed to labor, because you're going to come up against the
I'm glad.
some alternative that could open up a free way of life for people to pursue the arts and so forth, but not from a leisure basis, but from a relatively comfortable or even onto a affluent leisure base for the general citizenry as a pattern for a democratic way of a society to organize itself.
Well, I'm glad that Mr. Kelso is thinking about distribution of income, and I wish other people were thinking about distribution, because I think the distribution is the issue. In a workless economy, in a workless technology, and I think we're getting an increasingly workless technology, then you've got to find some other way to qualify the consumer, don't you?
Well, it might be that it could free people up from a lot of tasks as they do now just to make a living, so they could be concerned with some of the more relevant intellectual and spiritual and artistic kinds of perceptions.
Well, why don't we start talking about picking up the garbage and keeping the streets clean?
Well, that kind of stuff should be done. Could be done more increasingly if we had perhaps a larger capital pool that we could draw on.
I don't know why one needs capital. We've got unemployed labor, which given the right value system, see, not doing it for you or for me, but doing it for us, doing it, you know, if there were a sense of community and responsibility. Like, I've heard a splendid economist speak of the shabbiness of our public sector, of the collapse, for example, of our transportation system in New York City, under I think, wrong-headed administration, certainly under screwed-up values. Contrast that with the challenge to count the number of golf courses between Newark and Princeton when you take off from Newark Airport. I mean, this has to do with the value system that needs overhauling.
Yeah. Well, I think we need a value systems, and we need some sort of, particularly if you can begin to have the potential, practical possibilities be formulated within such context as we were discussing before about the potential for seeing on a systems world scale the opening upon sufficiency or even on into abundance as a reality for the first time. There are new possibilities that are beginning to open up to us that from a comprehensive position might have been very, very different from a historically constrained position were not as possible, but we can begin to think in some sort of broad-scale, comprehensive patterns of what could be potentially answers. Some people have some of these answers that could make some... Yeah.
Well, it could begin with the understanding that it's now technologically feasible, you see. And until, say, 50 or 60 years ago, perhaps it wasn't. But now the economic problem can be solved, and has been solved for a third of mankind, and can be solved for the other two-thirds of mankind. Now that's an earthquake in a value system that is predicated upon scarcity.
Yeah, sure.
And one thing, of course, that makes it difficult for economists to talk about the end of the economic problem.
The definition of economics.
That's the definition of economics. And this is why it's difficult for economists to grab the question of distribution. You see, the market process relieves, in principle, it relieves the individual of moral responsibility. The unseen hand is supposed to achieve equity. Well, plainly it doesn't. So how do you achieve equity? You have to move into the realm of politics. And as I said before, we're not very good at politics always, because we have pretended that the unseen hand is going to take care of the questions of equity and justice. But it doesn't. and manifestly it can't, and manifestly then with this understanding, the citizen has an obligation to become politically active and responsible.
Yeah, and we all have a responsibility to become as politically active and responsible and intellectually active and responsible, and those within as comprehensive a pattern of understanding as we can at this particular crucial moment in the evolution of events. I would say comprehensively this part of the universe in terms of a priori.
Well, it's the only part of the universe,
design, which seems to be the structure of the universal mind. We may be at a time of qualitative liberation.
You speak of this part of the universe. I will sound terribly reactionary here, but I think this is the only part of the universe we will ever know. I think it's possible for man, with predictable development in technology, to explore the immediate neighborhood of the sun. But a trip to the nearest star is out of the question.
Yeah,
and so we'd better
physically.
Well,
some sort of I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the point is, we can't deal with metaphysics here. We've got to deal with physics. And the laws of physics plainly tell us that the nearest star is out of reach.
It also says from the second law of thermodynamics that all systems tend to move. If I have it quoted correctly, you didn't do too well in prep school physics, but you picked it up since then, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure that I really know physics at all.
But anyway, the second law of thermodynamics is that all systems tend to move toward disarray to the limits of their system, as I understand it. And some people have looked toward entropy. Some people have seen the biological evolutionary process and human evolutionary process in terms of a function or a purpose to move across entropy and bring increased patterns of conscious understanding of the process of which we are a part. And if we could have all of humanity resonating in terms of its own given, inner-directed, liberated sense of participation within a context of social institutional structures which recognizes perhaps an abundance as a possibility for human institutions, we had a pattern where all humanity could resonate. There might be a resonating quality that would inter-accommodate us to cosmos at another level, transcendent to that which we've been throughout the human
experience. Well, it's pretty hard for a kid with kwashiorkor or smallpox to resonate.
Yes, I understand, of course, absolutely.
And I think that mankind has got to settle his destiny here on this earth.
Yeah, in terms of having a context where there could be all of humanity involved within a liberating context, including those who have been the have-nots, must be brought into a position where, in a material and in a knowledge-based sense.
That's the ethical law of abundance. It says that we cannot enjoy our prosperity, qualified as it may be presently, in the absence of significant progress in the development of the underdeveloped countries.
Yeah.
In other words, it is the law of abundance that says we can increase our well-being only by increasing the well-being of others.
Of all. We must be, it must be at the service of all if there is to be a synergistic pattern of behavior. It would be the behavior unpredictable as some of its parts. And so if one of us is hungry, we're all hungry in a very real sense. It seems to be a tremendous challenge as we begin to look ahead, but that seems to be a real sense, and it would seem to me also not only in a material sense, but also in the sense of an understanding of the scientific and the knowledge base that is available to us. And if I may say so, I'm terribly sorry we're running out of time. We could go on talking for hours and hours, but we run out of time for this particular segment. But it would seem to me if there's any institution that has helped in a really highly responsible way to give focus to the incredibly exciting developments of the scientific community and share those developments with colleagues within the community and the broader society, it's been Scientific American, and I congratulate you enormously upon the success and wish you all the very best of luck on into the future with this incredibly fruitful and important source of information you provide for humanity.
Thank you, sir.
Now, it's also been my pleasure talking with you. I will only say that I would hope that we might be able to get some of those perceptions, those scientific leading-edge perceptions, begun to be perhaps put also into a video context, so that some of the excitement of that might be able to become part of the television and video system of information.
Well, you know about video.
Well, I would just like to think that some of that excitement could be shared within a video format as well, as perhaps we hope this may have been for you being able to have the perceptions and the video presence of Mr. Gerard Piel, who's been our guest. I'm terribly sorry we've run right out of time, but of course he's the founder and publisher of Scientific American, an institution of incredibly significant import in terms of the world's evolutionary pattern now. Thank you, Dr. Piel,
Thank you very much.
It's been a great pleasure. May I just remind you, it's been your pleasure then to have his perceptions. I would like to invite you to tune in again next week. As we like to say, there's always good, interesting, technologically appropriate, sometimes fun-filled, and as of this evening, always highly responsible talk here on Conversations. That's it for now. See you next week, Mr. Piel. Once again, thank you very, very much for everything.
Thank you.